All right, hello everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. It is 1 o'clock. So we're excited to have you today here in partnership with ALEKS to bring you this webinar. Today we're actually going to focus on math redesign and math pathways. My name is Katora Young and I serve as the program analyst for the Florida Student Success Center, and I am joined by the ALEKS team. They're going to introduce themselves a little bit later, but I would like to go ahead and give you a quick recap and go over the logistics with today's webinar. ALEKS is actually one of our sponsors for the Florida Mathematics Redesign Institute we hosted in Gainesville, Florida in June, and we appreciate their support in helping us host that institute, in which we revealed our 11 math recommendations, which was the work done by our mathematics work groups, which consisted of our faculty in Florida, which brings us to today's webinar. So today, just to let you know, all participants will be muted for the duration of this webinar. A PDF version of the PowerPoint is available in the handouts pane. It will also be sent to you in an email as a follow-up upon conclusion of this webinar. If time permits, we will have a Q&A portion, but please feel free to type your questions in the questions pane at any point during the session, and please note that the webinar will be recorded. So this is just the agenda, so a brief overview. First, I'll give you just a general overview of the Florida Student Success Center, just because some people are still a little bit unfamiliar as to what it is that we do. Then we'll do a recap of the Florida Mathematics Redesign. And then we'll be followed by the ALEKS presentation with our ALEKS team here today, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A session if time permits. So first, I'll go over the Florida Student Success Center. So the Florida Student Success Center was launched in 2018 in partnership with Jobs for the Future, the Helios Education Foundation, and the Florida College System. We were the 15th state to join the National Student Success Center network, preceding Arizona, and we work to support Florida's 28 state and community colleges. During the center's first year, our focus was really centered around math pathways and redesign, which we'll discuss more today. But now that we're moving into our second year, we'll continue to do math work, but we're also launching our Florida Pathways Institute, in which we'll provide technical assistance to institutions as they implement guided pathways. So the Florida Mathematics Redesign recap. So this was our institute that we hosted in June that some of you may have had the chance to attend, but we're just going to focus on the recommendations that we were able to reveal at the institute. And those recommendations were really broken down into two types. So there were policy and practice. And with the policy recommendations, they could either be statewide or institutional. I won't read all of the recommendations. You can see the recommendations on our website. They are broken out in quick bulleted points, or you can read the full publications. Just to highlight a couple, recommendation 1 was to create common mathematics, create common mathematics pathways by aligning mathematics courses to programs, meta majors, and careers in Florida. And an example of a practice recommendation would be recommendation number 7, determine the K-12 standards that align with the post-secondary courses identified for each major or meta major to inform student course selection in high school. And that recommendation in particular is pretty relevant. K-12 standards in math are currently being revised in Florida. So now I'll go ahead and pass it over to the ALEKS team, and we'll hear from Noah first.
Awesome. Thank you, Katora. Hi, everybody. My name is Noah Evans. I am a marketing manager on the McGraw-Hill ALEKS team, and I am pleased to present some wonderful faculty members, actually, some peers of yours who we're fortunate enough to work with. And I'll start by introducing Jessica Lickery and Amy Hatfield. They're from Columbus State Community College in Columbus, Ohio. We've had the pleasure of working with them for a number of years now, and I think really starting to see some of the benefits of wonderful initiatives that they have on place on campus that you guys are going to hear about today. They were the recipients. Columbus State Community College was the recipients of the 2018 Leah Meyer Austin Award, which is presented by Achieving the Dream. And if you're not familiar with that organization, I would highly encourage you to go check out achievingthedream.org. The award essentially is granted to an institution each year who demonstrates massive improvements in student outcomes. So you'll hear a little bit about some of those outcomes that they have achieved. And then they will turn it over to Brian Mercer, who is the department chair at Parkland College in Champaign, Illinois. Brian is a good friend and a good longtime partner of McGraw-Hill, and he is a highly regarded thought leader in the non-STEM pathways and guided pathways movement. So I'm excited for what he'll share with you all later on. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Jessica and Amy first.
Thanks, Noah. And then we have control of the slides now, or?
Yes.
I'm having trouble moving the slides.
Okay, I'll move it for you then.
Thank you. Okay, so we're here to talk about our math redesign at Columbus State Community College. We're going to talk about two big initiatives. First, our developmental emporium, which uses with ALEKS PPL, the placement test in the first week. It's a boot camp. And then we're going to talk about our college algebra co-requisite, which uses the ALEKS courseware. Thank you. So our developmental emporium, phase one of it started way back in autumn 2012. We actually piloted starting in 2010. So we had 2 years of piloting and it went full scale in 2012. It contains all three of our developmental math courses. So our basic math and pre-algebra, our beginning algebra, and our intermediate algebra. So it's sort of like a dummy course number, Math 1099, but it actually contains 3 developmental courses. So students could be in any one of those levels, and ALEKS placement or ACT score or any previous course completion will determine where students begin. So in one classroom, we've got students in 3 different courses, and then within the courses in multiple different places, because the ALEKS software allows them to work at their own pace. And they can complete multiple courses in one semester, which obviously saves them money and time. So phase 2 of our developmental emporium was in autumn 2017. So we've done 2 years of piloting now of our ALEKS PPL boot camp. So in the first week of the emporium, we essentially delayed the start of the emporium 1 week. So the first week, we used the ALEKS placement test product in order to allow students to retest and hopefully improve their placement, so that then in the second week, students could either finish, continue working in the emporium in a higher level, or hopefully switch out if they scored high enough, switch out into a college level course. So we aligned our college algebra co-requisites specifically with the times, the class meeting times, to begin in week 2, so that those students could switch without any loss of instructional time. We're also working on getting some of our other college level courses aligned so that students can switch out in week 2 without losing instructional time. So this is the results, our very exciting results of our boot camp from this autumn. Again, we've been doing this for a couple years, but these are our most recent results. So this is the percent of the population who increased their math placement. So these are our developmental emporium students, and these are the students who placed up. So if you look at the total, we had 852 students participate. I don't know if you can see my, can you see my mouse pointing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay, good. Okay.
Oh, wait. Can we go back to that slide?
Sorry, yeah, can we go back?
Thank you.
Thank you. So of those 852 students in the emporium, 310 of them improved their placement at least 1 level. So they had to work in ALEKS for 5 hours, remediate. So the first day they took a placement test. Then the second day they came in after remediating in ALEKS for 5 hours. So we have that requirement. And on the second day, they would retest. And so this is the percentage of students that when they retested, placed up at least 1 course. Again, we had some students place up more than 1 course. So if you look at the number, it's about 36% overall, which is super, super exciting and encouraging. But what's most exciting and encouraging, especially in the spirit of ATD and the Leah Meyer Austin Award, is if we disaggregate our data, which is it's big focus now. When we look at data, we're not just looking at overall course success, we're looking at the disaggregated data. So when we do that, very exciting. For instance, Black and African American males, 40% of them placed up. So not only are we're closing these equity gaps and serving typically underserved population, and here as well, first generation students, Pell eligible students. So that's really, really encouraging data.
And then that one.
Okay, so our college algebra co-requisite, we've been piloting that also since autumn 2017, and this fall we went full scale. As we speak, we have our first full scale implementation of 46 sections. So in the pilot, we only piloted with the lowest students, lowest placing students with ACT of 20 and 21 or the equivalent. Now in the pilot, or in the full scale implementation, we have ACT scores from 20 up through 23. So to help you understand that, if you look at the chart, we still offer a regular traditional college algebra offering, but it's only for our highest placing students. So they have to place into it. So if they have an ACT 24 or the equivalent, they place into college algebra. But then students placing between 20 and 23 go into our co-rec college algebra. Our co-rec college algebra has a beginning algebra prereq. So typically our traditional college algebra had a intermediate algebra prerequisite. So we've lowered the prereq to beginning algebra. We've added a credit hour and we've added 2 contact hours. So it went from 4 credit hours to 5 credits and from 4 contact to 6 contact. And that extra time, really the start, our desire to pursue co-rec really started from wanting to improve all college algebra students, not just our lowest placing students. Overall, they weren't doing that well. So we thought if we had more contact hours, that's a good idea, period. Let alone when you're going to lower the prerequisite and let in, by definition, less prepared students. So in one semester, they're able to complete the co-rec college algebra, whereas in the traditional model, they would have had to complete the intermediate first in a semester and then go on to college algebra in the next semester. So our co-requisite, many schools that we talk to do a 2-course split model, paired model. We actually do an embedded model. So our co-requisite in college algebra, it's all 1 course. So some people ask us, what do you do in the co-rec portion? There's really no co-rec portion. The whole course is college algebra. What we embed student skills, so soft skills, student skills, and Amy will talk about that in a little bit, as well as any necessary prerequisite content. So when we started to pursue the co-rec, we used ALEKS. We entered our college algebra objectives into ALEKS, and if you're familiar with ALEKS, you know it will naturally just automatically map any necessary prereqs. When we did that, we realized that most of the prerequisites, about 65%, actually came from beginning algebra, not intermediate algebra. So those students were going from beginning algebra 1 semester, then they were taking intermediate another, and then a third semester after that, then they were supposed to remember everything they learned from beginning and everything they learned from intermediate. So we removed any of the prereq overlap and we've embedded it. And again, ALEKS really was crucial in helping us. We're not sure we could have efficiently mapped the prereqs and served our students efficiently, given them the prereqs they need without this tool. We've heard from schools that have had dreadful department meetings where everyone is arguing over what prereqs you need for which topic, and ALEKS really made that very, very simple and efficient for us. So this is just an example. We've actually trimmed our course a little bit since this slide, but if you look at the class content, there's 216 goal topics. So we took our college algebra objectives from our syllabus and we put them into ALEKS, so about 200 goal topics. And then it mapped for us the prerequisite topics. So at this point, there were 161 prereqs. So a total of almost 400 topics in our course. But that's, again, this is sort of an example of what we're saying, that if you have to do this manually and just go through all your objectives and figure out what prereqs you needed, it would be very inefficient, but ALEKS does this really, really well.
So we also wanted to talk with you a little bit about the instructional form of our course. And so an important aspect of the course is that it is heavily based in active and collaborative learning in the classroom, which means we have employed a flipped model approach. So I don't know how familiar you may or may not be with a flipped model when it comes to instructional design, but if it isn't done well, where students are held accountable for the things they have to do outside of class, it can be a real nightmare and not at all support the active learning you want to do. So for us, students are required to watch lecture videos that we created ourselves that align completely with what we call a collaborative text set of guided notes. So students fill out these guided notes as they watch one of us or a colleague going through that lecture in a video format. They do that the night before, the day before class. So they come in with that resource ready to go. We're going to show you some of the resources we've employed or we've utilized to develop our course, and one of them is a free website called Edpuzzle, and that'll be on a slide toward the end. But Edpuzzle actually allows us to grade that the students have watched the videos, and then we can download those grades via a quiz question that we embed. Download that into our learning management system. So students actually do watch 100% of the videos and fill in 100% of their guided notes. It's pretty magical. And then in class, it's all active learning, right? They're in groups, they're working with us, they're exploring the concepts that they saw in the videos the night before, and when they don't have that answer, because of course they're just beginning the learning, we aren't the person that gives them the answer right away. We're the, we're the facilitator of their learning. The first resource is those guided notes. So they're learning to open up the guided notes and learn from their own notes and apply it to what they're currently working on. And then they're getting comfortable with and discussing what they're doing with the people next to them. And eventually, maybe we come in and we provide enough guidance so they find their own answers. And that's basically just what an active classroom is. And I'm sure Brian's going to talk to you a lot more about that as well. We've learned some of what we do actually from visiting Brian's class years ago. So the prerequisites then, where does that come into play? That's delivered outside of class primarily. We have little nuggets that we embed in class. We call them need to knows. So perhaps it's on the quadratic formula right before we start finding the zeros of a polynomial. So we might quickly touch on that in class. Basically, though, all of class time is devoted to the college algebra content because the prerequisites are being delivered to each student on an individual basis outside of class when they do their homework in ALEKS. So our classroom is a traditional pencil paper kind of classroom. The ALEKS is not delivered in a lab setting. It's delivered outside as the homework system. The other thing that we do in class, in addition to work on the college algebra content in this active way, is to very intentionally address the student skills and the soft skills we know emerging college students need to be successful. So for years, we maybe got angry with our students if they didn't keep an organized notebook and they didn't get to class on time. Maybe we got frustrated. So instead of getting mad, we're scaffolding for them how to do that. And so in class, we watch videos on growth mindset. We watch videos on how to study for a test, on math anxiety. We have group discussions on various topics. We have syllabus quizzes, those kinds of things, and that's all built into the course itself. So then we can go to the next slide, if we could. Thank you. So, we mentioned that we just went to scale recently, this semester, in fact. We've been scaling up over 2 years, and as we scaled up from 2 sections initially to 46 now, we've seen our success rates increase, and that's not typical when you scale something up of this nature. Part of why that we think that's occurring is we standardized 100% of the materials in this course. Everything we do has to be very intentional, right? Because we're taking underprepared students, students that are typically, disproportionately the students in those lower serving groups that we talked about earlier in the equity slide, and we're now elevating them into a college algebra course. Well, we've got to scaffold everything for them, everything we expect of them, every expectation, and then hold them accountable. And we've got to have the highest quality of materials. So we've developed all of our own in-class and out-of-class materials, and we share those across every section. And I can't stress that coordination, the importance of that. I can't stress enough. So, of course, time is needed for that, release time. And this gets into some of the nitty-gritty of what your institution maybe has in place as policies and what other institutions don't. So I understand that can be a restriction, but you cannot do this without being able to devote true truly adequate amounts of time to it, and have a significant team in place. You know, it doesn't have to be a big team, we're just two, but have a team that's committed to the time it's going to take to do this right. And then as you're scaling up, the instructional training and the continued professional development is so important. Again, can't stress that enough. Here at Columbus State, the way we've been handling that is we've created detailed daily instructor guides that let instructors know what they're doing for pretty much every minute of those 3 hours they're in class together. We're reminding them of the intention and the purpose of every activity that we do. We're also meeting weekly and paying our adjuncts to come to those meetings, weekly PD meetings where we're just sharing the successes and the challenges and giving each other tips and, you know, discussing the pedagogy of flipped and active learning. How do you make groups? And of course, there's an initial training as well. So it's not a one and done kind of thing, and it's a continuous improvement, a continuous evolution, and it's just it's an adventure I hope you guys get excited about, because it's been great. Next slide. Thanks. So here's some of the results. You know, gosh, we could have just like thrown in a million slides on data here, and we have a couple more to show you, but thinking big picture, and that's part of the message we want to deliver today is, yes, there's the nitty-gritty detail of the course itself, and you can find a lot of supports for that, including ALEKS and all of our wonderful people at ALEKS. But it's also important to think about the big picture of why we're doing this. So if you think about how long it takes a student to complete their Gateway Math course, if they start at the intermediate algebra level, right? It's still going to take them a full year to complete it. And with the current pass rates, at least here in Ohio, of intermediate algebra and college algebra, there's like a 20% of students get that done maybe in a year. And that's if you don't even account attrition. In this model, we have a 400% increase in the number of those students. We're calling them near ready, the intermediate algebra placers, a 400% increase in the number of students completing that course in 2 semesters. We have higher success rates. Every single semester, we've had higher success rates in our college algebra course, co-rec course, than in our regular college algebra course. And I'm going to have a slide up in a minute. I'm going to touch on that in a little more detail. But I just wanted to make a point of that we're seeing high success rates. We're not sacrificing success for this acceleration, right? We're seeing a closing of equity gaps. We didn't include a chart on that specifically for the co-rec, although we have lots of it and we can share lots of that, but it would be the same thing that you saw in the PPL slide. We just didn't want to inundate you with slides, but we're seeing those equity gaps closing. We are fostering maturing, it's a beautiful thing, maturing college-ready students. The difference in our student from day one to the last day is amazing in their growth as students. So some big takeaways there. And then let's see what's on the next slide. Yeah, so this was some of the results I wanted to talk about in just a little more detail. This is over 2 years of piloting the college algebra co-requisite course versus watching what was happening in the regular college algebra course during that same time. Okay, so we're full scale now, so these results are only from piloting. You can see that the first column here is the college algebra co-requisite. What I wanted to point out there is, because it was during pilot phase, the only students that were in there are the students that were placing at the intermediate algebra level, the 2021 ACT students in Ohio. Versus what we see over here, which is students that were college ready, right? They either took intermediate algebra or they placed into college algebra. And so, and the other thing we did is we corrected for CCP students. There are obviously no CCP students in our co-rec because they weren't even college ready. So to compare our native students, we removed the CCP students that always inflate the college algebra success rates. And in fact, that's how we look at them now, because we sort of been thinking, well, you know, our success is somewhere around 50, 51%. Well, if you take away those high school students that perform at like 80% success, we're actually down below 42% success, compared to 52% success rates in our pilot over those 2 years. And again, when we look at the some of the subgroups of students, we see they're all performing at that similar 52% rate. So we're seeing a closing of that equity gap. We're seeing the biggest change here in this column right here, the 33 versus the 52%. So all of these results consistently over 2 years is what gave us the confidence to go ahead and go full scale with this thing. And so far, so good. And do we have anything else? Maybe one more slide? Yeah, okay, so I'll kind of get quick. I want to make sure Brian has plenty of time to talk. Generating buy-in can be an issue. At least it is with most of the folks we talk to. And sometimes that buy-in is trying to get faculty buy-in. Sometimes you're trying to get administrator buy-in. I can promise you, you're going to need to try to get student buy-in. So keep that conversation at a high level. Keep to the big picture model, even if you're going to have to, you know, change things here or there. You know, sometimes people, all they want to focus on is that next course success rate. So try to keep the picture big when you're and also focus on disaggregated success data, because I think that's something everybody can agree on. When you see those equity gaps closing, there's nothing that's going to bring people together quicker than that. And then it was also very important for us to incorporate learning science into the course instructional methods and the course development. So it wasn't just Amy or Jessica or Karen or someone else saying, hey, we think looking at mindset might be an important idea. Nope, learning science tells us that. We think that, you know, there's certain ways that our brain can learn and grow. Well, learning science tells us that's actually the case. There's a better way to and a more efficient way to study, and learning science shows us how to do that. So we've got a website here for you on this slide. We've got a slide at the end with all these different websites, including the Edpuzzle website I mentioned earlier. So those are some resources that might help you as you're trying to generate buy-in. And then 3 non-negotiables, because as I said, everybody's going to have different restraints and constraints that they're dealing with at their institution or in your state. So for us, as you're tweaking all different kinds of things, we've even talked to people who are doing a paired model instead of our embedded model. Regardless of the model, regardless of what you end up working with, 3 things that we think are must-dos, non-negotiables right off the bat are some sort of strict attendance and participation policy. We don't have one at our institution, so via our syllabus, we created one. And just not to get into a lot, I could go into a lot of detail there, I don't want to, but when I mentioned that everybody watches the videos and fills out the notes, 100%, because if they don't have 100% of it done, they're considered not participating for the day. And they only get 5 of those before their grade drops a whole letter grade. So however you need to do it, however creative you need to get that attendance policy in there. We can't imagine doing this without ALEKS. It's our safety net. We can't worry that we forgot to include a certain prereq that one student absolutely needs, even though the other one saw it already. ALEKS takes care of that for us. We put all the important prereqs in there thanks to ALEKS, and students who need them get them just when they need them. And students who already know them don't have to spend time doing them. So better students aren't slowed down and frustrated, and students who need more support have that support. And then finally, formally, and again, we could share more detail on how we formally have done this, but formally addressing these student skills and behaviors and mindset in the class itself. Well, I think that's it for us. So I think we'll turn it over to, oh, sorry, one more thing, our resources that we mentioned. If you want to learn more about flipped learning, there's the Flipped Learning Global Initiative. Jessica and I have both been certified as flipped instructors via their coursework there. The Learning Scientist videos that I mentioned, 2 other resources for you for developing some of the soft skills materials would be On Course, it's a student success activities workbook, and also a math study skills workbook by Jessica Bernards. Those websites are here. Edpuzzle, and then Train Ugly is a great place to find videos on growth mindset. All right, and then this is like one snapshot. So if you had to take something away and show to a colleague, you could take them this. It's a poster we created for another event recently here called Strong Start to Finish, but it touches on all the different things we talked about in one messy, confusing, busy, but maybe helpful picture. And now I do think I'm done.
And for the sake of time, we're going to skip this Q&A just to make sure that Brian does have enough time to do his portion of the presentation. For the attendees that have asked questions so far, I have assigned those to Jessica so that she can go ahead and respond to those in her follow-ups after the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Brian, and he can begin.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. My name is Brian Mercer. I'm the Math Department Chair at Parkland College, and I'll first have to ask you to pardon my voice. I've been fighting a little bit of fall allergies, so if I scratch a little bit, I do apologize. Let's see, do I have control?
Yes, you do.
All right, let's see. Nope, not working for me either, unfortunately.
Nope, okay.
Next slide, please. So that just quickly just shows you Parkland College, located pretty much in the center of Illinois. We're a pretty typical community college, and been through a lot of changes in the last few years. If you go to the next slide, please. All the way back in 2011, our math sequence looked like pretty much everyone else's. All of our students had to clear the intermediate algebra hurdle before they were able to get either to the college algebra pre-calc path or the non-STEM liberal arts math path. Would you click the next slide, please? And that is, I have control now, it seems to be working. That is a joke I stole from Jack Rotman at AMATIC years ago. If you look at the way those courses, particularly those developmental courses, were taught, they were all taught as those students were headed to calculus. And as we know, many of the students in our developmental courses are not having any plans to head to calculus. So there was considerable pressure to make some big changes. And this is, again, going all the way back to 2011 for us. It started a little bit earlier than that in some other places in the country. And as far as where all this is coming from, or where all these things, all this pressure was coming from, the developmental courses that we had, quite frankly, haven't really worked well. If you look at typical 50% success rates in a lot of those courses, that does not lead to many students reaching college level courses in any reasonable time frame. We are seeing certainly more and different students coming to college, and that was putting some pressure just to look at things perhaps a little bit differently. We're seeing legislators getting involved. I know you all in Florida certainly felt that a few years back. Administrators were sort of pushing and supporting and trying to react and trying to figure out how to handle these sorts of things. And quite frankly, faculty, math faculty in particular, are slow to change because we've been doing things the way we've been doing them for a long time, and change is just difficult. And finally, we as math teachers haven't really done the best job of helping students see why math is important. And I think it's, this comic was shared with me a while ago, and I thought it was kind of hilarious, but it's probably been going on for quite some time, students wondering, where is this ever going to be relevant to me? And particularly my specialty, or my sort of passion most recently, is thinking about what we're doing for our non-STEM students. You know, I love complex rational expressions, but is that really an important topic that all college graduates must know how to handle? Another thing that sort of inspired us to make some changes, two big things actually. Our Career Center sent this email out to our faculty about the time that we were sort of at our wit's end of trying to decide, okay, what new initiative are we going to try now? And at the same time as this was happening, we were getting word from the AMATIC folks about the New Life movement. I'll show you a little bit about that in just a moment. But when you look at these career competencies, things that employers want graduates to be able to do, it really kind of got us thinking about what are the things in the math curriculum that we could do or we could change to help emphasize some of these competencies. And so it's sort of a perfect storm of a lot of things happening at the same time. Here's the AMATIC New Life inspiration for a lot of the big changes we made. And just down the bottom there, obviously you have a copy of these slides. If you just Google AMATIC and New Life, you can get all kinds of information just from a lot of the changes that are happening. But two courses just to point at, and I think you can see my mouse, two courses to point at that got our attention. The big one was this math literacy course. The secondary one was what they call algebraic literacy, and I'll say just a little bit briefly about that one. But math literacy was really kind of the big source of the change for Parkland. So, and I saw this, excuse me, I saw this in some of your documentation for your recommendations, which I love, by the way. They're just absolutely wonderful, and I think I'm looking forward to some exciting things coming out of Florida. That AMATIC position statement, sort of before AMATIC came out with that statement, it was maybe scary or taboo for somebody to say, well, I don't think you need intermediate algebra to be a graduate, to graduate from college. Before that, intermediate algebra had sort of served as the gatekeeper. And when this statement was put out, that just sort of opened the door for a lot of folks to say, well, what if we imagine a world where we don't have to have intermediate algebra just to get to some of these courses? And so that was sort of an exciting thing. And like I said, a lot of these things happen about the same time to create a perfect storm for us to make some big changes at Parkland. Around that same time as well, I think this is actually in 2014, there was a NAID AMATIC summit, and Amy Getz from the Dana Center made this comment. I absolutely love it, so I steal it and use it everywhere I talk. Sustainable change will be led by faculty, supported by administrators, and enabled by policy. And all of those things have to work together to make good change happen. And fortunately for us in Illinois, we were able to see that. And I think you all in Florida are at that same place right now with these new recommendations. Our first stab at a revision, we used to have that pre-algebra, beginning algebra, intermediate algebra path. We put math literacy as a parallel track to beginning and intermediate. The math literacy course being the one that is for non-STEM students headed into liberal arts math or stats or gen ed math, whatever you want to call those courses. And then the traditional beginning and intermediate for our college algebra or pre-calc students. After a period of time, that wasn't quite sustainable, and I mean a short period of time, that course pretty much killed our beginning algebra enrollment. And so we basically replaced math literacy, or replaced beginning algebra with the math literacy course. And about the time we made that change, we're also seeing some contemporary math or quantitative reasoning courses start to pop up and see some traction. So that sort of led to some changes up here as well. And then I said I'd mention a little bit about algebraic literacy. That's just, if you do make a change this radical, that is what you're able to do with intermediate algebra if you don't have any non-STEM students enrolled. So algebraic literacy, that's just sort of I'll say an evolved version of intermediate algebra. So at Parkland, we had made quite a number of changes, and our advisors and counselors were sort of thinking, okay, are we done making changes? Can we stick with this for a while? Well, the last couple of years have brought more. So now we're doing multiple measures, and that's led to a whole slew of things coming out of that. We have standardization of cut scores. In Illinois, we didn't have standardization of cut scores from one community college to the next, so that's now happening. We're looking at getting rid of pre-algebra. We're looking at moving the math literacy course and algebraic literacy, or just intermediate algebra, into high schools. And so this has led to a lot of conversations. There's actually legislation passed along these lines, led to a lot of conversations and good partnerships with our local high schools. So now we're actually able to give placement into college level courses based on these two courses being taught at the high school level. And then we're also adding co-recs to these courses, college algebra, quantitative reasoning, or intro to stats. And so the co-rec movement is hit us in Illinois as well. And so, as you can see, there's quite a bit happening, and it's all very, very exciting, and I think leading to some positive outcomes for students everywhere. Just to quickly run through the math literacy course and say a few things about that. That one, as I mentioned, is a new non-STEM developmental math course. So, you know, as a math course goes, that one certainly is an infant. It's only been around, I'm going to say 8 years max, even at places that were piloting it. Its intent is to replace beginning and intermediate algebra students for the students not headed to college algebra, which, again, big time savings. That's another one of the big pushes is getting students to and through those gateway college level courses. You'll hear that phrase a lot, and getting students through the developmental sequence in one semester or even 0 additional semesters. If you do the COREC model, those are all certainly good outcomes. As far as the topics from math literacy, certainly topics chosen to prepare students for general education, math, and stats, but also just life. I tell people when I talk about that course, we want students to come out of that course being more well-informed citizens, critical readers of the news. We focus on numeracy, we focus on functions, data analysis. We do a lot of reading and writing and use of technology in that course, which, you know, if you look at the topics, you'd say, well, there's a lot of things from intermediate or from beginning algebra in a math literacy course, but it's certainly not done in any way like a typical beginning algebra course. It is group-based. If you watch my class being taught, I'm almost never at the front of the room. It's designed to be flexible, though, so that, you know, understanding that not every instructor is going to teach it the same way. The quantitative reasoning course is sort of a new passion of mine. I sort of described it as a liberal arts math course that's evolved just a little bit. And certainly it's a course that's way more appropriate than college algebra. That was a quote from one of our students. But the thing about, just to talk a little bit about college algebra, and I saw that in your recommendations as well. In Illinois, for a long time, college algebra has not been a terminal course. In many other states, I know that it has been. And what we're seeing with the pop-up of these quantitative reasoning courses replacing college algebra is, again, similar to the conversation about intermediate algebra being a taboo subject and people being afraid to say, why are we making everyone do this? That same conversation is happening about college algebra, and folks are feeling more empowered to say, maybe college algebra is a bad terminal course, and I'll state my own opinion and say that I think it absolutely is. Again, the quantitative reasoning course, similar to math literacy, designed to be group-based, but designed to be flexible, again, with the understanding that not every instructor is going to teach those courses exactly the same, but they're set up to work to have students working in groups. As far as goals of that math literacy course or a quantitative reasoning course, no one wants to say that it's an easier path. We're trying to promote it as an alternate but still challenging path, and perhaps maybe saying it as a more appropriate path for many students. The math is done in context. We always describe that as sort of mixing in medicine with your sugar or medicine with your ice cream. We focus on developing critical thinking. We want students to feel more engaged in the classroom experience. Certainly could be done in a flipped model or just done in an active learning model. We talk about trading algebra for understanding. The rigor on the algebra side maybe not is the same as what you would see in an intermediate algebra class, but the understanding of the math that is included is certainly improved, and that's a fun thing to watch students go through. I always like sharing this when I talk about these courses. This is what you'll see a traditional class look like, and I just quickly mentioned that this was a classroom observation tool. Someone from the University of Illinois came to observe my class, and this was what my class doesn't look like. But the the dots are male and female students, and the little squares are the rows, and the turquoise numbers represent some notable event that the classroom observer documented. And this is what it happened. This was what it looked like on the day he actually came to observe my class. And as you can see, I'm just bopping all over the place. My students are arranged in pods of 4 or 5, 3 or 4 students together, and I just bounce from table to table to table to table, and help, use Amy's word, help facilitate their learning. I tell my students in these classes that I want them to learn how to learn. I don't just want them to learn some specific math, but I want them to be good learners, and to feel empowered and to feel that they can tackle problems and solve problems, not only in math but in life. So it's just a completely different teaching experience. I always tell people it has completely changed the way I teach pretty much every class that I teach now. Just some quick things to mention. What I've learned just from talking to people all around the country about these courses in the last 6 years. As an instructor, you've got to buy in. You've got to believe in the course that you're teaching, especially if it's new, especially if it's uncomfortable. If it's not, if you can't sell it, then it's going to be certainly difficult. And talking to instructors, we can make Seinfeld jokes. Unfortunately, as math instructors talking to students, it's hard to make Seinfeld jokes anymore because they have no idea who Seinfeld is. Another thing I've learned is that productive struggle is good. That's one of Noah's favorite things, I think. We can talk about productive struggle for a long time. In fact, we've done whole workshops on it. Students need to be taught that productive struggle is good. Students need to have certainly a lot of conversations, especially early in the semester, that that real math isn't just here's a problem and do one exactly like the one I just showed you. We want you to learn math, that math is a problem-solving tool, and that you're going to develop some tools and then use those tools to solve other problems. And that's a new experience for a lot of students. So again, that's sort of back to the selling it. They need to be reminded that some of these courses are definitely going to be different and have a different feel when they're put in the driver's seat and they're given a lot more responsibility for their learning. Oops. Next slide, please. Thank you. Assigning groups can be tricky. When we talk about the group work, just some tidbits of things we've talked to people about. Typically, we find 3 to 4 students is best. 2 is a little bit too much, or too little, and 5 is a little bit too much. In terms of how you assign groups, there are all kinds of schemes people use, and quite honestly, I do it all kinds of ways. So I don't think there's any magic bullet for the best ways to assign groups. I think mixing abilities is definitely good, and I think spreading out unreliable students is definitely good. So just little things, tidbits of wisdom I've picked up. One last thing that obviously when you get to know your students you can do is adjust for personalities and just potential issues. So the quiet, meek student, putting them with the really loud, boisterous student may not be the best idea. But those are certainly just some things to think about if you go the group work route. Next slide, please. That I put in there just because I thought it was funny. But certainly when you talk to students about group work, many of them, at some point you're going to encounter the situation where somebody does all the work, somebody does none of the work, and talking to your students about the fact that that's a real life experience, about the fact that in many jobs they have after graduation, they're going to encounter the person who tries to take over, they're going to encounter the person who doesn't pull their own weight, and these are all good experiences to have as a college student. And again, that's back to that employer competencies thing. These are things that employers want students to know how to handle when they go out into the workforce. Next slide, please. that one I put in there just for Noah and Lamar if he's listening. The teamwork aspect as you go about making these sorts of changes. It's important to have a good structure in place. It's important to work together. It's important to, again, back to Amy's comments about Amy Get's comments about the structures that need to happen to make these changes successful. And again, that's back to having faculty working, legislator or administrators need to be supportive, and when legislators do get involved, hopefully it's to enabling policies that allow you to get things done. Next slide, please. As far as excuse me, as far as options for textbooks, the good news to me is that the publishers are in this game, and that tells us that there's enough traction to take it seriously. So there are just plenty of options, and that's all I really need to say there. You can click to the next one. Again, when I talk to faculty about these things, this is one of those big picture. You can see this momentum building, and you can see one state looking at another state and saying, well, they're making this work. I need you to make it work. And so get out ahead of it, make it a faculty-led thing, and act before you're forced to react. Teaching the courses online, yes, it can be done. And when I talk about the courses, I'm talking about the new ones that we're seeing, the math literacy and the quantitative reasoning courses. It doesn't seem possible at first, but I'm aware of a number of places that are doing it. So I'm certainly willing to serve as a resource there if that's something that I can be helpful. Don't try to work alone. That I think I've already said. You can click to the next slide, please. Cave people. Just be on the lookout for this and click the next click, and it's an animation at the bottom, please. What do I mean by cave people? That's colleagues against virtually everything. Cue the laughter among the muted participants. Even if you get excited about something, don't be surprised that there's going to be pushback. Don't be surprised that there are going to be colleagues that just don't want to change. And that happens. I've seen it happen lots of places. And be persistent and do the good work is my inspiring words. I mentioned Jack Rotman before. The formatting on that didn't work, but his leadership was instrumental in getting this New Life initiative off the ground through AMATIC, and I sort of have stolen a lot of his comments over the years, so I always try to mention him, and his quote there I think is a good one. And again, it's just back to be leaders and make the decisions that you think are going to be best for your students. And I think we'll all come out okay. Those last couple slides, I've just got some resources. I don't really need to say anything about them. And whew, I did it. I think I'm done. The last one I think is just thank you. So I want to save at least a little bit of time for questions. Yes, that's me and my wife at a Cardinal game.
Okay, then we do have a couple of minutes for questions. We do have a few in. Okay, so I'll just pick a few out. So one question we have from Kathleen Arnold, and I think this would be for Jessica. How did you align a course with a week to start? So this would be for the first week of boot camp.
You want me to? Yeah. This is Amy. I guess Jessica just pointed at me and said, "You speak to this one." So
okay,
Amy was instrumental in this.
Thank you. Thanks. So our Emporium course meets for 3 hours, and our co-requisite course also meets for 6 hours a week or 3 hours each class meeting. So each class meeting is 3 hours. So in all the blocks of time where we had the Emporium, we created some co-requisite courses at those same times. So that part was easy, right? The times matched up. Then we looked at the success rates of how many students we anticipated would place up, and we had enough research to say we think it's about, let's say it's 100, right, that are going to place up and need college algebra. So we then adjusted the caps on the college algebra courses to save seats for those students, and at scale it just meant saving 3 seats in each section. So we still had healthy enrollments, and then we released the caps after the placement boot camp, and those students went and saw an advisor. We had advisors waiting for them. We didn't have to have a ton of them. We were able to leverage our very limited advising resources. We had about 7 advisors that were just dedicated to taking some shifts, and we had a place reserved, and all students met with them and talked about financial aid implications before moving sections. We then adjusted the curriculum of the course to be over a 14-week period instead of a 15-week period. And then finally, we spent the first week of the co-rec not even doing algebra. We only work on the soft skills. And then the first assignments they have are like a head start on some of the prerequisites. And I'm happy to offer more detail offline on that.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, and we do have one more question, and this one will be for Brian. So how have the critics that have said students should take college algebra because it provides the students flexibility in degree choices reacted to these changes?
I think I missed the first 2 words of that question.
Oh, it's okay. How have the critics that say that students should take college algebra because it provides the students flexibility in degree choices? The critics, yes. How they've reacted to these changes.
So that's a good question, and those same critics are the ones that, and my colleagues like to rub in my face, that when I first heard about the math literacy about 2010, that my first reaction was, well, if you're changing the requirement from intermediate algebra, you're limiting choices. And so there are advising issues there. There are, you know, I guess as far as to answer the question, how the critics have reacted, I think they've just sort of decided to let it go, and that may, I'm not sure exactly what that means, to be honest, but that's an ongoing debate, and I guess my answer to it is there are more appropriate courses than intermediate algebra, and there are more appropriate courses for college than college algebra, and I stand by that. And I'm now, I'll just say, completely convinced. I feel like that was a politician's answer, but that's the best one I've got for now.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, well, due to the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A portion. I have assigned the questions to our panelists, so they will be able to follow up to your questions with answers if we weren't able to get to them during the webinar, so please don't worry, they will be able to answer your questions. We will send out a copy of the webinar with a follow-up email. It's also still available in the handout section if you'd like to go ahead and download that really quickly. But thank you for joining us. Thank you again to our panelists from the ALEKS team. We were happy to have you guys today, and we hope that you will join us again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.